Knitted hats were made for bad hair days, I swear. It's the only option. So we're going to run with it. Hello and welcome to episode 11 of the Knitting Vicariously podcast. My name is Caroline. I'm found more commonly across Instagram and Ravelry as dunderknit. I'm a knitter living in London, and if this is your first time joining us on the podcast, hello and welcome. A quick word of warning that we are a swearing friendly podcast, and therefore you may find the language to be a little bit colourful from here on out. But if you've been around here for a while and you know that my language can get as colourful as the stash wall behind me, hello and welcome back. I hope you're all well. It has been another crazy old week here. The Vlogmas madness continues, as you may have spotted if you've been perusing over on the channel, or even if you just stopped by and thought, bloody hellfire, this woman has a lot of posts. That would be why. This is not a standard thing for anyone who is unaware. Vlogmas is a challenge that runs throughout the vlogging and YouTubing community from the 1st of December all the way through until the day before Christmas, or even Christmas Day itself, where the challenge is to post videos as regularly as possible, ideally once every day, but with some room for manoeuvre. So I have been doing okay up until now. I started my first on the day before, the 1st of December, so on Friday the 30th, and have been posting daily updates since then. Some have been a little bit more festive than others, so there have been a few trips to Christmas markets, a few trips to cities that have kind of beautiful festivities, a couple of days wandering around bits of London when I've been out at meetings. There's also been a few days where I've been sat at home, but have tried to continue to show you either festive content or kind of yarny content as well. So hopefully those of you who have chosen to follow along are enjoying that. But yes, we're coming up to the festive season, and here in the UK, Christmas is kind of the biggest of the holidays that are celebrated, although others are always available. And with that in mind, I will be podcasting again next week, so my aim is to get something out that week, but the following week will be Christmas Eve and then Christmas Day itself, the Monday, Tuesday, and so I will be taking that week off. But my aim is to get to you an episode out in between Christmas and New Year, which is affectionately known, at least in my house, as Twixtmas. And so during that period of Twixtmas, I will hopefully be putting an episode out for you to tide you over into the new year, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what the schedule will look like going forward. But in the meantime, it's everything festive that is ongoing. We have our knit along, which continues. So for those of you who aren't bogged down with gift or obligation knitting, or indeed those of you who are bogged down with all of these things but need a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel to guide you through, the Blame Dunder Knit Along is our opportunity to cast on the things that we've been dying to cast on and work on for a really long time, whether it be knitting or crochet, whether it be any kind of yarny related craft. The only prerogative is it needs to be something you really, really want. It doesn't have to be for you, it can be just a knit that you really wanted to knit for someone else, but it's got to be something that makes your heart really sing. That's the real prerogative. As long as you cast it on in between our start date, which was the 15th of November, and the end date, which is the 31st of January, both of which are Thursdays, I think, then you will be eligible for the CAL. And yeah, it's a really fun opportunity to use a little bit of kind of external persuasion, accountability, responsibility, blame, whatever you want to call it. Put all of that my way, and I will happily take responsibility for all of your actions, even if it means purchasing yarn, even if it means casting aside gift knits. I am here for you. I will absolve you of this. We'll take a little bit of time to look at some of your projects later on, but I did just want to step in up front and say, so with the knit along, there's absolutely no onus on you to get your projects finished by the end of January, but you will be in for an additional opportunity to win a prize. There are 3 prizes up for grabs. Those 3 prizes can be won in one of 3 ways, of course. So the first of those is by posting over on the Ravelry group. We have a Ravelry group. It is the Knitting Vicariously podcast group over on Ravelry. You can find us by searching in the groups tab for Knitting Vicariously, and within that group there is a chatter thread, and I will be using random number generator to pick a post at random to award 1 prize to within that chatter thread. The second way that you can win a prize is also within the Ravelry group, but it's by posting within the FO thread. So within the FO thread, you are eligible to post one time with multiple projects. So if you've finished multiple things as part of the CAL, then I would invite you to make sure that you post one single post and edit that to add each of the different projects that you have that you've finished for the CAL. And again, I'll be using random number generator to pick one person at random from that thread who will then be awarded a prize. And the third way that you can do it is over on Instagram, where if you use the hashtag #BlameDunderknitAlong, I'll put that here on the screen. Please note it does need to be with the phrasing, the spelling, the wording as it is shown here. Anything else, and I'm probably not going to be able to find or see your post. But if you use that hashtag on your project page, I again will be using random number generator to select one post at random, and that will also be the recipient of a prize. And while I'm still waiting on a couple of bits and pieces for the prize packages themselves, I feel as though I have taunted you long enough, and so I wanted to give you a very quick indication of what some of those prizes might look like. And so in putting together this prize package, what I really wanted to ensure was that, as well as obviously being a great reward for taking part in the knit along itself, it was also to ensure that since starting the podcast, obviously I've shared a number of makers with you, whether it's the projects that I've been working on, whether it is the yarns that I've been using, the bags, the kind of knitting accessories that I've been using. And what I wanted to do was to take the opportunity with this prize giving to then actually share some of those things with you even more widely. So hopefully, as I go through a couple of the bits in the prize package, again, please note these are not yet complete, but you will hopefully recognise a few of the makers that I talk about as we go through. So all three of the prize packages will be broadly the same, albeit the elements themselves may differ slightly, and hopefully that'll become clear momentarily. But one of the things, or rather two of the things, that everyone who wins a prize is going to get hold of is, first and foremost, this is a knitting and gin tote bag. Again, those of you who've been following along from the start will know that I do enjoy a little tipple or two, and gin is certainly one of my preferred. I have not been drinking any of the stuff before showing it to you. I don't think, no I haven't. But it is a preferred tipple of mine, and in particular Knitting and Gin over on Instagram, who is Sue Stratford, is a good friend of mine in real life as well, and she's very, very kindly and generously donated a number of these tote bags. I took this around at Rhinebeck when I was there earlier on this autumn, and in particular Indie Untangled, and this had a number of comments when I was going around, all of them positive, I think, where, yeah, people were certainly admiring it. So I know that there have been a few of these that have gone out, but they're certainly not widespread. So hopefully you will look forward to getting your hands on one of those. And then similarly, to go with it, there is the inimitable Knitting and Gin pin. And again, it features these tiny, super cute little knit stitches that you've got on the bottle itself. So yes. So as I mentioned, again, full disclosure, Sue is a very good friend of mine in real life. She is someone who I met through my local knitting group, and I've been a big fan of not only her work, but obviously her as a person, and she's very prominent over here in the sort of UK circuit for knitting shows, and just generally creating some amazing things. The vaulted shawl that I wore back in the very first episode, that was one of her designs that I test knit, and she also has, I should mention, partly because I'm really excited about it, she has a new pin knit club that is coming out. So for those of you who aren't aware, the knitting pins that she has here are one of many that she designs. She has a few other ones that she creates as part of this pin club, and so it is a subscription based club, so you can go over to her website and find out a little bit more about it. I'll put her details down in the show notes section below, which will also be over on Ravelry and tagged on Instagram, so you can find out a little bit more. But if you are a fan of knitting related pins, and indeed puns in general, I would highly, highly recommend that you pop on over and check out her pin knit club. The next thing that you'll receive as part of the prize itself is a project bag, and those of you again who've been with me since the very start will know one of the first bags that I shared was a fabulous big drawstring bag. It was a sweater size that I was able to use for, what was I working on at the time? You tell me, what was I working on? What was in it? I can't remember. Stalactite, I think. Yes, stalactite. Thank you. That's very helpful. But oh dear, yeah, really need show notes for myself. But one of the bags that I was working with at the time, as I say, it was huge, it was fantastic, really, really good, well sized, very well made. And I'm delighted to say that Tanny Casey, who is a fabulous, fabulous bag maker based over in Pennsylvania in the US, has very, very kindly and generously donated a number of bags for the prize giving itself. So not all of them are identical, as you will see, but they all feature a sort of similarly beautiful rifle paper crow print. And so you have a massive bag, huge little guide holes there for your yarn if you're doing colour work and you so need it, but really big, sturdy, canvas bottomed, and frankly big enough to fit a fairly sizable sweater. And so there are 3 designs in total. There's this first one here, then you have this second one, and I will say the kind of olivey green on here, it really kind of has my heart, as well as just the fabulous print with some of the mints and the little coral pops in here too. So that's the second. And then lastly, the third is here, and again, just crazy, vibrant, bright, amazing, beautiful, big, big flower prints with the same, again, canvas lining inside, so you'll be able to find everything readily. So yes, you'll have, each of the 3 prize winners will receive one of these bags, as well as the tote and the badge. I should also say, because Tanny is just a wonderful and delightful human being, that she also included a little extra for me in there as well, which was deeply unnecessary. Deeply. I'm very, very grateful to her for it, and it's got, look at the little parrots. Again, little flowers, little parrots, little orange zip that's on there too. Honestly, the range of bags that she makes that's available on her site are just fantastic. So I will put that up here so you can see. So she is Tanny Casey over on Etsy, but I will also make sure that I pop the link in the description box below. There we go, back in the room. So yes, project bags. And so all things that I love so far: pin badges, tote bags, project bags. What's something else that I love? What is something else that I love? Oh, it's a hard one. Yeah, what would a prize be without a little bit of yarn in there too? And so again, one of the yarns that I've used in recent months that so many of you have commented on that you've really loved has been the yarn that I've been using for my no frills pullover from Das Mondschaf, who is a German-based indie dyer, and I'm delighted to say that Sabrina has helped me put together some prizes on this too. And so there are 3 different colours, and again, as with the bags, these will be given out at random, so hopefully in winning a prize you are happy with whatever you receive, but just so you know, there are going to be 3 colours in there. The first of those is, we have, this is her, let me just double check, this is her Cersei colour, and it is the most stunning plummish burgundy colour, and you will be receiving these 2 skeins. So we have her Kid Silk Mohair on top here, which is her Virgo base, and that is, let me just double check, 72% mohair, 28% silk. And on the bottom we have her 100% merino singles, and that is a fingering weight there. So this is her Cersei colourway. We then have her TARDIS colourway, which is the most incredible, super deep, moody, tealy blue. It's almost a navy, but I'd say it's got a little bit too much teal in there to make it a true navy, but I love it. Again, with the merino singles, which is her Aurora base, and the Virgo and the mohair lace. And then I couldn't not. I really couldn't not. And so the last colourway that's in here is her Kill Bill colourway, which is just the most perfect, bright, mustardy, yellowy gold. Because gold. It had to happen. It had to happen. So again, each of the prize winners will be receiving 1 pair of these in one of the colour pairings. Does that make sense? I think you know what I mean. So yes, a little bit more to come still a little bit more to share. But hopefully that gives you a little flavour of what you would be in for with the prize. Now, I'm hoping as well that just the nature of the giveaway, the nature of the cowl itself, has a lot of you taking part just for the hell of it, just so you can have the thing that you've always wanted to knit or to work on for a really long time. But hopefully this might give you a little added incentive just to, you know, crack on. Obviously the prizes themselves are only a small part of the whole nature of the knit along. The point of the knit along is for you to experience the joy of casting on something that you've wanted for a really, really long time. And I know from the comments and some of the feedback that I've received that the cal in itself is doing exactly that, and that makes me incredibly happy. But the other thing that makes me super happy is the notion that I'm able to share some of the incredible makers whose products and designs that I've been working with over the last few months, that I get an opportunity to share those even more widely with you, and that also makes me incredibly happy. And hopefully it provides the little added incentive that you need to maybe consider indulging yourself for a little bit, because it's Christmas. But yes, without any further ado, we will get over and on into the podcast proper. And so show notes, as ever, can be found in the description box below, as well as over in the Ravelry group. You will also be able to find us if you follow Knitting Vicariously over on Instagram, which is the podcast specific account where I post one specific update every time that there's a new episode available, tagging all of the makers and any relevant hashtags, so you can follow them along there more easily too. In terms of content this week, I have a couple of bits to share with you, including obviously what I'm wearing, but also a little finished object that I'll be talking you through, as well as giving you an update on a whip that I've been looking at. From there, I have a little bit of vicarious knitting to talk you through, as well, of course, as showing off some of the amazing things you have been producing as part of the knit along. But without any further ado, let's get into what it is that I am wearing. And what I am wearing should be of absolutely no surprise to you whatsoever, because I'm pretty sure I've shown this off on the podcast. I don't think I've worn it, but I have at least shown a picture of it off on the podcast already this year. But I am wearing my fabulous Tecumseh sweater. Tecumseh is, again, if you're in a community, if you have eyes, you will have seen dozens of these buggers. But Tecumseh is a fabulous pattern by Caitlin Hunter, who is Boyland Knitworks over on Instagram. And it is, yeah, it's a great pattern. I have modified it quite a bit. I've talked about some of that previously as well, so apologies if there's a little bit of repetition as I go through it. But I wanted to show it off in a little bit more detail, and so the best way for me to do that is probably to stand up and show you Tecumseh boobs. Here we have it. Oh yes, and also massive apologies. Hang on. Hi. Massive apologies for not showing you the no frills boobies last week. I cannot believe I was so remiss not as to give you the money shot, as it were. Oh dear. Yes, so a very, very kind viewer pointed out they were slightly sad that I didn't do it, and I cannot believe I missed the opportunity for floof boobs. So the time will come again, rest assured, and I'll be sure to celebrate it appropriately. So just so we're all clear. But yes, here you have the Tecumseh boobs, and in showing off the Tecumseh boobs, you will probably have spotted the main modification that I made with the sweater, but I will come back to that later on. As ever, I try and just tippy toe up a little bit, you will see in terms of length, this hits me, I want to say kind of low hip. This is sort of low hip, mid bum kind of height, and it is obviously very flowy. There's a lot of positive ease built into this, and in terms of the sleeves, they are full length. And yeah, the colour work itself, as you can see, 3 repeats of that, so that is entirely as per the pattern itself. But the main thing that's different is really my sleeve separation, and I will talk you through that momentarily. In terms of the yarns that I'm using, so my main colour here is Madeline Tosh MCN Sport, and that is in the Smokestack colourway. It has alongside it Madeline Tosh, shockingly, in the Carbon Dating colourway for the crosses, which is in the DK Twist base, and similarly the DK Twist base in the toner cartridge for the shields or the feathers, depending on your personal interpretation. But yes, if I stand side on, you should be able to see, again, sort of fairly big, fairly flowy, just a really nice kind of boxy, stylish shaped sweater. And so let me sit down and I will take you through it in a little bit more detail. Howdy, so yes, this is my Tecumseh, and the main difference in my version is that I decided to separate for the sleeves a little bit higher. So in the main pattern picture, which I'll put up here just for your reference, you will see that the sleeve separation doesn't happen until after the second repeat of the colour work. So down here, I can show you that there. Roughly down here is where the sleeve separation takes place on the main sweater. And I am someone who, so I'd already knit by the point that I cast this on. I finished this for Rhinebeck earlier on this autumn, but I cast it on, I want to say sort of over the summer, maybe June time, and having already knit one of Caitlin's patterns earlier in the year, I knit the Nanilchik Swan Show and recognised that in doing so, the sleeve separation, which is also quite far down here because it is a swan show, and that's kind of the way that swan shows work, it was fine, but it did leave me a little bit limited in terms of my general sort of movement, manoeuvrability, particularly when it came to putting any bags over my shoulder. And as I think I mentioned pre-Rhinebeck back in an earlier podcast episode, the idea of not being able to put bags over my shoulder when I was at Rhinebeck felt like a serious misgiving. Because, as I've stated previously, my intention was to have a fair few bags over said shoulder at Rhinebeck, and that is a wish that very much came true, as again, those of you who've watched the post-Rhinebeck episodes will have seen. But yes, it also just, in terms of manoeuvrability, it was with the swan show, obviously you sort of lift an arm up and the sweater rides up a little bit on one side, and it's not the size or the shape that I really wanted. So for me, I had a look at my size, and I believe this is true of most sizes, but certainly for the size that I was knitting, which I can't remember. I will put on the screen for you here just so you're aware, but it's also over at my Ravelry project notes, which you can check out. But in terms of the size that I was knitting for myself, I spotted that with the increases from the yoke, because it is a top-down sweater, the increases, the last kind of main round of those, where most of those were completed, were immediately before the second set of crosses. And so this is its widest point kind of here. And so the main thing for me then was just to decide that rather than kind of having the increases stop here and yet knitting it straight for a little bit further, what I would do is increase to its widest point and then separate for the sleeves, and then just carry on the rest of the body as normal, albeit with a smaller stitch count. And that worked pretty perfectly. The only area where I really had to make shit up, essentially, was on the sleeves themselves. And I think it's fair to say that my sleeves are a little bit botched. So yes, it is fair to say that my sleeves were perhaps a little bit on the creatively worked side, which is a generous way of saying somewhat botched. So if I hold my arm up, you may be able to see that there is a bit of interesting shaping going on here, which is almost like a sort of an inverse Popeye bicep style shape that's going on here, which wasn't entirely intentional, but very much a result of needing to decrease fairly dramatically in the spaces in between the colour work, because I really didn't fancy faffing around with the colour work to try and have shaping in there as well. The original pattern, I believe, has the sleeves that are just knit flat. I definitely wanted something that was a little bit more tapered, albeit not really close fitting, and so I did want to include some of the decreases in there. It does mean, however, that the shaping is a little bit off, but in all seriousness, when I hold my arms normally, you can't spot it at all. And while it is something that I love to point out, because we as knitters, I believe the vast majority of us, are always very keen to point out exactly our flaws when we have knitted items. I know I'm terrible for kind of holding things up and going, isn't it great? Look at the bad bits. This is certainly something that for the most part I'm pretty pleased with. Now, in terms of the yarn, as I mentioned, it is a mix of the MCN for the sport weight, which is the main body yarn, but also the DK Twist for the colourwork portions itself. DK Twist is a yarn I have used a lot for sweaters in previous years, and it's a yarn that I really enjoy working with. The MCN, obviously, because it has the cashmere content in there, is a little bit more prone to pilling, and I'm certainly noticing a few pills, despite having only worn this sweater I think once or twice. There's certainly a few more pills than I would expect on a non-cashmere containing garment. So yeah, it does mean it's going to need to be perhaps de-pilled a little bit more often, but for the most part I think the yarns work really well together. I'm pretty sure I might have shown you my floats in the past, so I'm not going to do that again, not least because it would involve me showcasing bits of myself that you don't need to see right now. So yeah, but for the most part I really do like this sweater. I'm very glad I made the modification that I did. I think failing to do that probably would have made this far less wearable for me. I do know that while I love the the Nanilchik, I can never say that, the Nanilchik swanchoat that I made, I really don't wear it very much. And I think a large part of that is, one, it's kind of a worsted to Aran weight sweater. So it was knit, well, I knit it in Quince & Co. Lark, but also that, again, I think just the kind of weight, the shape and the size of it means that it needs to be really fucking cold in order for me to consider kind of donning that, as opposed to any of the other sweaters that I have. So yes, it is definitely a more wearable shape for me with the modifications that I've made. So moving along now into actual knitting, and I have a finished object to share with you. Finally, after a drought, we have a finished object about my person, and it is, as you may have guessed, my ribbed beanie hat. Now, as I've mentioned previously, this is a hat pattern that is very loosely based on a pattern by Jared Flood of Brooklyn Tweed. I will put the original picture of it over here. It is the Mawson hat that was launched previously as part of, I can't remember if it was a Wool People or if it was launched independently. I bought the pattern separately, but I say it's Mawson-ish, if you like, just because I mentioned this in previous weeks when I first cast this on, but this is essentially a 1x1 ribbed beanie. And aside from the decreases, which are a little bit different, I will grant you, from some of the sort of standard decreases that you might see on a hat, there is very little about this to distinguish it and make it really kind of ownable, if you like. And certainly, I would say, in my personal opinion, not quite enough about it to justify having the price tag that it has, which is around, I believe, £6 or £7, somewhere in the region of maybe $9. I will double check that. Yeah, $9. And certainly, as I say, you know, there are some lovely decreases in here. It's different from what I would have seen elsewhere. Is it $9 with the decreases? I'm not sure. But I'm not taking it off because, as I mentioned right up front, not a great hair day. Sorry, not ready to share that with the world. But at the same time, it's also a little bit chilly here today, so it is also kind of necessary in keeping me warm. But I will tip my head forward and hopefully, through the magic of cameras, you will be able to see some of the decreases up there in a bit more detail. I mean, I'm making an assumption, right? I have no fucking clue what you can actually see. But the other reason why this is Mawson-ish is I cast on slightly fewer stitches, but I will come to that momentarily. First things first, this amazing yarn, and let me pop right up and get close and personal with you. Hi. This is Illimani is what I'm going to go with. Illimani yarns, and it is their Amelie base, and the Amelie base is just beautiful. This is there's a few yarns that you're starting to see out like this at the moment, and it is a very kind of fine chained core with strands of strands of merino kind of blown through it. So yeah, really interesting construction. I've got my leftovers here. Let me hold them up here so you can see. But this is, you'll see there's this very fine chained core to this, and then the green fibres are kind of blown through. So it's very similar to the, I think it's Woolfolk Luft, which is again slightly heavier weight, but the construction of the yarn is very similar. But what it means is it makes for the most lovely, soft, squishy texture when it comes to knitting up. So as you can see, I knit it using the green colourway. There are numbers attached to it. I can't remember what the colourway is specifically, but certainly of the colours that are available, there is definitely only one green, and this is it. But it's a really pretty, it's kind of a sort of more olivey hunter, almost like an army green, than it is a true kind of emeraldy colour, but I still really, really like it. And in terms of the sort of size and the fit, the Mawson pattern has a number of different stitch counts. I cast on 108 stitches. I used my now standard favourite go-to alternating cable cast on, which is where particularly useful for knitting in rib. You are actually casting on in knit or purl, and so that means that it gives a far more kind of rounded edge, if you like, to your knits, rather than the kind of harsher line that you get when you're casting on using the long tail cast on or the German twisted cast on. And instead, if I scooch forward and get all up in your business again, you might be able to see that, yeah, it looks just a little bit more kind of continuous and flowy, and eye bags, lovely. And yeah, it just looks a little bit softer when it comes to the edges there. But yes, I cast on 108 stitches, and then I used a couple of different needle sizes. So I cast on initially using a 3.5mm, which is a US size 4. I then went up to a 4mm needle for the kind of first, almost what would be the kind of first section of the rib, if you like, on a standard hat, and that went on for maybe kind of 1.5 inches, 2 inches in the 4mm US size 6, and then the main body of the hat was knit on a 4.5mm, which is a US size 7, and that just means that it gives it a little bit more slouch, a little bit more kind of I guess kind of movement is probably the wrong thing to say for kind of a sort of tighter fit beanie hat, which is a style I prefer, but certainly it would give it a little bit more drape if it weren't quite so close fitted. As it is, it probably just makes it a little bit kind of looser and a little bit of a kind of really snug fit, and as it is, it has the potential to be slouchy but isn't. Does that make any sense? Certainly for me, I'm not really someone that suits massively slouchy hats. I tend to find closer fitting hats are the ones that suit me best. I know that certainly for a beeswax hat, for instance, my Jenica hat, all of which are available for you to have a look at over on my project pages, those are the hats that I tend to reach for far more so than the slightly slouchier ones. I know that my Sparkling Cider has a very similar fit, for instance, the hat that I just knit by Kristen of Villenvine. I know that my cardamom coffee hats that I knit earlier on in the podcast as well, both of them have very similar fits with maybe a tiny bit more slouch, and so all of these have shapes that really work quite well for me. The ones that I tend not to pick up so much are the hats that tend to have perhaps a little bit more slouch in them, so unfortunately my Slable is very much one of those. I spoke in previous weeks that when I put it on there was maybe a little bit too much width-wise slouch that I was seeing, and indeed in spite of numerous attempts to tuck and to fold creatively, and thank you very much to Susan for recommending those, I got to a point where I thought, do you know what, this really isn't working for me, and there is someone in this world who loves wearing hats like those, and she just happens to be rather knit-worthy and happens to be my mother, and so she has been the very, very grateful beneficiary of the Slable hat that has gone over to her. I do think it can be modified, so what I'll probably do is look to see if I can take in some of the width-wise for that, and I've mentioned in the past that I wanted to knit that using the other colourway of Woolfolk that I got when I was over in Brooklyn, but that's by the by, that's for another day. I'm talking about this hat right now. Oh, segue. But certainly for me, this shape is one that tends to work best, and hopefully you'll agree that it suits me too. So yeah, I don't think, again, sacrilege, I don't think I'm gonna need a pom-pom for this. I'm pretty happy with it as it is, just to sort of lob on my head as and when it's needed. It's very cozy. It's close fitting but not too close fitting, in that there's still quite a bit of ease there, so hopefully it's not going to be a terrible proponent of hat head or hat hair, for instance, but we shall see. And again, I'm not going to show you. The decreases themselves are fairly straightforward. It's done in panels, and again, I don't want to give the game away, but it is fairly straightforward once you've worked it out. It's just a case of remembering which is which, and so I couldn't do that whilst I was also on a train with the people running late, and so I just, yeah, cocked it up and had to start over. But for the most part, it's really simple and straightforward, and it ends up with a hat that looks rather snazzy, if I do say so myself. Is it $9 worth of pattern? Possibly not, but again, I don't want to harp on about it. It seems to be a standard price that they apply to all of their patterns, which makes sense, but yes, I would say that if you're looking for a ribbed beanie, there's plenty of others that are available. So we move into what I'm working on and works in progress, and given that this has been my commute knitting for part of this week, if you've been following along with my Vlogmas episode, you will have noticed that this is something I've been working on a fair bit while out and about. It has been my commute knitting of choice, and in the meantime, when when I don't have cats running in and out of the room because they're going batshit crazy for a change, I have been working on a project that is in my now very familiar psychedelic squirrel bag by Little Grey Girl, and this is my Fern and Feather sweater by Jennifer Steingass, and I'm getting there. So at the moment I am, let me hold it up so you can see, how is my hair all over this? I mean, I know how, because it's my house and this is what happens to things in my house, but still, it's not ideal. But I have my Fern and Feather, and there is a fair bit more progress on it this time. So if I pull that down, you should be able to see. I currently have it on 2 needles, 2 circular needles, because I was trying it on to see if I'm in the right place now to start on the rib, which I am. But yes, this is the Fern and Feather sweater by Jennifer Steingass, who is Knit Love Wool over on Instagram, and it is stunning. And I'm not going to start this again because those of you who watched last week know where that leads, but it's a really beautiful sweater. I've talked about this a couple of weeks now. This is inspired predominantly by my wonderful friend Meredith, who knit this exact sweater in these exact colours, and therefore creativity is dead. Because all I've done is chosen to copy her outright. The yarn I'm using is the Plucky Knitters Yak Paca, which is a yak and alpaca blend. I will hold up the yarn cake so that you can see. It's a 50-50 yarn, 50-50, it's a 50-50 yak and alpaca blend. And if I pop it up here, there we are, you will see that it's a really interesting construction. It's plied, but perhaps not in your most typical sense, in that it's not a sort of traditional worsted spun yarn. It looks a little bit more complex than that. I've joked in previous weeks about the fact that it looks as though there's already cat hair embedded in it, which for someone in my house and my condition is no bad thing. But if that's not your choice, I fully understand and support you in that. But for me, I'm really enjoying how this is working up. This is my 3rd skein of the main colour. The main colour I'm using here is Pinstripe, which is this beautiful dark grey. The lighter grey that I used for the colour work here is Going Grey, also in the Yak Paca base. And again, the 2 of them together are just lovely. And so I'm knitting the size 49 inches, which will give me a fair bit of positive ease around the bust. And certainly when I tried that on earlier today, that's what I was getting, which is going to be big and oversized and cozy. And I'm very much looking forward to it. So there we go, some colourwork on colourwork action for you. But no, really enjoying how this is working up. I've mentioned previously that I'm knitting it on a 4.5mm needle, which is a US size 7, and really enjoying it. The gauge I'm getting is pretty much spot on. I am now at the point where I'm going to put the ribbing on the bottom here, and so hopefully by the time you check in with me next week, I should have at least the body of the sweater complete, if not have made a little bit of headway too over on the sleeves. I will confess that this hasn't been getting quite as much attention as I would have liked between the Vlogmas challenge, which is taking a fair bit of my time, between both filming and editing the videos. Arguably, I'd say editing is taking up more of my knitting time, because obviously it's time that would be spent otherwise sitting on my bum doing a bit of knitting. But yeah, so it's suffering a little bit as a result of that. It's also been as a result of the Advent minis that I've been opening over on Vlogmas, and the fact that I'm trying to crochet those into my granny stripe blanket as I go. So I do have a little bit more progress on that. I'm not going to share that this week. I will save that until next week, and I will give you an update then, and then hopefully in that Twixtmas episode I will be able to share with you the work that I've put on throughout the month of December. And so we move along into vicarious knitting, and as I talk a little bit about my vicarious knits this week, there was something up front that I just wanted to address. So those of you who are active over on Instagram will have noticed that this is the time of the year when all of the kind of self-reflection and planning for next year comes to the forefront, and one of those in particular is the Make 9 challenge. To those of you who perhaps aren't familiar with it, this is a challenge that goes around on Instagram where you post 9 thumbnails of patterns or projects that you're really keen to cast on and work on in the new year. And it's a really interesting one. You get to see perhaps people's plans, people's combinations, the sorts of sweaters or garments or accessories that they really enjoy knitting or working on, and it's a really interesting time. Now, as someone who is big into the vicarious knitting, who has a love for all things potential and enjoys putting together these combinations, you would think that this is a challenge that is absolutely and completely up my street. And to a certain extent, you'd be right. I really enjoy it as an activity, as an opportunity to observe and look at what others are doing. But in terms of taking part in the challenge itself, it's not something I've ever done previously, nor do I think it's something that I'm going to take part in this year. And that's not a downer or a reflection on anyone else's choices whatsoever. Please, please rest assured in that sense. But it's more a reflection of my mindset and my kind of personal choice for how I work on or choose to work on projects going forward. So, as you'll have seen on the podcast, I really do enjoy thinking about what I want my future projects to be, what they could be worked out from. I think for me, the real challenge comes from saying in advance, here are the things that I'm going to do, here are the things I'm going to make, because to me that feels like a very big commitment. And I am someone who I make no bones about the fact that I can be quite impulsive. And I know myself well enough to know that certain projects that I've been coveting for the longest time and I'm desperate to cast on, there are times when I have just cast them on or been about to cast them on and it's been a case of kind of thinking, yeah, not right now. Not right now, because the time isn't right, or it's not what I feel like working on, or I've just finished working on something that's very different and the joy and the energy that I had for working on that is something that I want to replicate or kind of find a similar outlet to, and this is something that's very different. And essentially it's about being in the right frame of mind at the right time. And so for me personally, the Make 9 challenge has always been a little bit of a struggle because I've got a bunch of sweaters, I've got a list of them that I'd love to make. And at some point it will feel right for me to go, ooh, that's the thing I want to work on right now. But in terms of nailing my colours to the mast and kind of putting it out there and saying, here are the things I'm going to make, that doesn't really feel like me. Now, I appreciate that there are people who handle the challenge very differently. I was having a very good conversation with this, with Ellie of Skeyndir about this over the weekend when I met up with her over at Wild and Woolly. And again, she is of a similar mindset, which is, these are the things that I want to make right now at some point in the next year. And the thing is, I feel as though I spend a lot of my time doing this on the podcast anyway. So yeah, I really enjoy the challenge. I enjoy watching it and seeing what others are up to. I'm probably not going to do one myself, but then I spend enough of my time over here talking about the vicarious knits that I want to make that hopefully you get a fairly strong steer for where I'm at with those anyway. So forgive me if I don't take part in it, but if it's something that is up your street, I'm super excited to see what you have in store for the next year. But certainly from my side, there's a number of things I've talked about. There are projects I know I want to get back to. Obviously my Widow's Kiss, which, you know, full disclosure, hasn't seen a stitch of action in the last week, which I do feel a little bit bad about. And I do need to get back to that sooner rather than later. We've got my no frills pullover, which needs to go into the freezer so I can rip back that mohair and start to alternate it in the round. I've also got things like the Isbro sweater, which is one of Ellie's patterns that she has published over in Bladek Garn, and I'm really keen to start that. That might even be something I try and get finished for EYF next year. But also things like the Sauva Bellon sweater, which I've mentioned previously, is a very informal knit along that I'm doing with my mum, where we're helping her get to grips with knitting in the round for the first time. So that needs to see a little bit more action put into it because I think I've done very little on that so far. There's a bunch of things that I know I want to be working on, and at some point I will, but in terms of nailing colours to the mast, that's not quite my style. One of the many myriad of other things that got added to my list this week happened upon me when I went over to Tribe for a visit. So Tribe is my local yarn store. It is in southwest London in Richmond, which if you are in the vicinity and haven't yet visited, I would wholly recommend that you find a free day and go and spend a little bit of time over there, because aside from the fact that Richmond is a beautiful part of the city, the Thames runs through it, it's right down by the river, it's got some beautiful parks as well, which Tribe is in very close vicinity to. It's just a really lovely yarn store as well. If you are interested, there's a Vlogmas episode that I did, I think it's Vlogmas Day 8, that you can check out, where I did a little bit of skirting around so you can see it in a bit more detail. But it's just a fabulous store, and Millie the owner is an absolute superstar. While I was at Tribe, I was browsing the shelves and looking at some of the amazing yarns they have to offer, and it was actually a new pattern sample that caught my eye, and so I'll put their picture of it up here, but this is the Pompidou shawl that has been designed by Karen Fernandez, who works over in Tribe as well with Millie, and it's still being worked up. It's not released just yet, but I might have just had to buy a couple of bits to work on it as and when it is, because the mistake that I made was trying on this shawl. Because I think, as you might have noticed, I'm very into garments at the moment. I do love a hat and a couple of accessories like the mitts that I've knit previously. I'm not the biggest shawl knitter, and so it was a surprise to me when I went over and looked at this lovely shawl and thought, oh, that's nice, and tried it on, and instantly fell in love with it because it is the softest and just the most perfectly wearable shawl. It's really simple and straightforward. It's just a very simple knit in itself, and so I was really surprised, but yeah, I was just taken aback by it. So I did have to purchase the yarn for it because, you know, you can never be too careful. I have here, it is Spectrum Fibre, which is this yarn here, and it's on their sparkle sock base, so hopefully you should be able to see some of the silver stellina. It's a 75% superwash merino, 20% nylon and 5% silver stellina, which is there, and it is in their slate colorway, which is this beautiful kind of fairly cool neutral grey. And so there are a couple of rows that are knit in the sparkle sock, and then a couple of rows that are knit in their silk mohair. Now, Spectrum Fibre, they do have a silk mohair base, but the shawl itself, when I tried it on, I was able to, so when I wear my shawls, I usually have the kind of pointed section here, and then I wind the ends round to bring them back to the front. And what I would say with this shawl, because it's quite long and quite shallow, rather than it being a sort of very deep triangular shawl, what I was finding was that when I'd done that and wrapped it round the front, the two ends were quite low down. And as you may have spotted, the two ends have little pom-poms on them because, oh, it's just too cute. And the problem that I was having is that those pom-poms were in rather suggestive places. Yes, not to put too fine a point on it, but so to speak. But what I was thinking was, actually, I wanted them to sit a little bit higher up. I wanted it to be kind of nice and snug in together. And I was finding that for me and for the front section of it to sit where I wanted it to, which was not too high, not too low, that I needed the length to be a little bit shorter than the original pattern As You Knit It, where, you know, if I were just to wind it once, they would sit quite low down. So I decided that I probably wasn't going to need the full amount of kid silk mohair that was written up in the pattern. And so rather than using the Spectrum Fibre, I could afford to go for mohair with slightly less yardage. And if you're looking for silk mohair with slightly less yardage, there's really only one obvious choice. And so I did have to pick up a skein of Shibui Silk Cloud, which my camera may decide to focus on in the fullness of time. There we go. And Shibui Silk Cloud is kind of renowned as being one of the most luxurious mohair bases that you'll find. So it is 60% kid mohair, 40% silk, and the higher amount of silk content is the one that really does give it the softness and the kind of luster, if you like, of it. This is in the graphite colorway, and so together, so we have graphite and slate together, and so for all that the graphite here is perhaps a little bit darker than the slate colour over here, what I will say is the original pattern is knit with the kid silk mohair at a slightly loose gauge, so you should be able to see the light through it, and so the colour differential won't look quite so strong once it's knitted up together. But of course these two are part of the pattern, but it's only really completed when you also have mini poms. Now, these are not showing up the correct colour at all on the camera. It doesn't know what to do with them. The camera is trying to make these look as though they're some bright day-glow orange, but in reality they are a properly true coral pink colour. I'm trying to think if I hold them back here. Can you see? No, the camera is just refusing, but they are definitely almost your kind of like day glow, slightly fluorescent pinky coral alongside this, which I'm very excited about. And so this may need to be cast on in the not too distant future once the pattern has been released, such that I can make this perhaps my new commute project, my travel knitting, because I think it's going to be fairly straightforward. Obviously, it's only a couple of cakes that I need to worry about, and so it's going to be fairly portable, and it's also going to be fairly mindless. So yeah, I'm quite surprised, but also quite excited about having this lovely, warm, cozy hug around my neck. I also do love me a hat project, and so I will obviously hark back to last week's episode where I showed you some of the purchases I'd bought when I was over at a yarn story in Bath, and in particular thank you very much for the various different compliments and suggestions and indeed outright demands that you made that I need to go and buy more than that single skeins of porter. Which is the La Bien-Aimée colourway, that is that gorgeous kind of deep huntery olivey green colour, and to make a sweater out of that. I thank you all very much for your help in enabling me. I'm still mulling it over, I'm still thinking about it. It might need to be a Christmas present to myself, but we shall see. But yeah, those are my Vicarious knits for this week. So if we move along into yours and we start to take a look at some of the things you've been working up for the knit along, holy crap. There is so much amazing knitting and crocheting and just general crafting out there that has been done in the name of this knit along, and it makes me very, very happy. As ever, I'm delighted to take any and all accountability that you want to swing my way, and indeed just facilitate you being able to work on these amazing projects, because frankly they absolutely deserve to be worked on. They are beautiful. And so without any further ado, I'm going to give you a little bit of an update on what some of the folks over on Ravelry have been working on this week. Oh, I love them all so much. It's so exciting. So we've got, again, more and more finished objects that are starting to come through into the FO thread. Hopefully seeing some of the prizes earlier on in today's episode has given you any additional incentive that you may or may not have needed to continue to work on those projects. And if you haven't yet cast on, fear not, you still have plenty of time. The knit along runs until the end of January, the 31st, and so as long as you're cast on, and if you want to enter a finished object, obviously finished by that point in time, and you post it in the appropriate thread, you will absolutely be eligible for a prize there too. And so that is it for this week. As ever, the show notes for this week's episode, as I've mentioned, can be found both below and over in the Ravelry group. You will also be able to find the chatter thread for the Blame Dunder Knit Along, the FO thread for the Blame Dunder Knit Along, and indeed our thread on December's Vicarious Knits, which is where you can go in and post any and everything that has caught your eye that you're not able to work on right this second. As ever, you'll also find us over on Instagram, where I am dunderknit, and that is my personal account. If you want to get in touch with me, that's probably the best account to use. But there is also the Knitting Vicariously account, which is the account that I use to post show notes, as well as links to all of the makers that I've mentioned as part of this week's episode. And so that's it for this week. I will be joining you again next week ahead of the Christmas break, and then putting in a quick update for you in between Christmas and New Year. But in the meantime, all that remains is for me to wish you a wonderful rest of day, rest of week. I hope your knitting is keeping you happy and fulfilled, and if for whatever reason it isn't, I hope you have the chance to knit vicariously. Keep on keeping on, and I will see you again next time. Bye! So let me just pop on in so you can get a better shot of this here. I have literally no idea what you're... No, it's like licking your own elbow. Can you see it? I don't know if you can see it. I can't see. Hang on. Technology has the answer. Right, so if I do that... Right, you turn around. Can I see what... Right, I can't really properly see. Can I zoom in? Oh, it's front facing, I can't zoom in, for fuck's sake. Right, if I go rear facing camera, this is just ridiculous. Right, if I zoom in, I mean, that's super helpful. That gives me a really good idea of what you're seeing. Okay, we're gonna go with, right, you there, you here. Tap that. Oh yeah, you can see. You can see. Decreases. Amazing. Super. Wonderful. It's been a long week.